Welcome to the third annual GradFUTURES Forum hosted by the Graduate School at Princeton University. My name is Eva Kubu and I'm the Associate Dean for Graduate Student Professional Development and Director of the GradFUTURES Initiative at Princeton. We're delighted you could join us for the third year of this annual event, an expanded week-long professional development conference designed to meet the imperative of graduate student professional development at this moment and to signal the graduate school's strong commitment to preparing our PhD students for the future of work and empowering them with the clarity, competencies, connections, and confidence they need now and in the future. There are more than a dozen engaging keynote speakers, skill-building workshops, and networking sessions highlighting diverse career options within and beyond the academy. Our goal is to share inspirational stories and practical advice and facilitate connections and community among the broader graduate community. I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to my team, Assistant Dean James Van Wyk, our coordinator Laura Christensen, all of the graduate school staff, and all of our graduate student fellows and associates for their efforts in putting together this year's forum. When it comes to professional development, alumni play a critical role in encouraging and mentoring current graduate students. And we are truly fortunate to have an incredibly engaged and dedicated Princeton alumni base. This morning, it is my pleasure to introduce one of our most dedicated alums. As president and CEO of Waters Corp, Dr. Udit Batra brings more than 2 decades of leadership and operational expertise in the healthcare and life sciences industries. He has a proven track record leading multi-billion-dollar global organizations and driving results at the top of the industry. Prior to joining Waters in September of 2020, Udit served as CEO of the $7.7 billion life science business of Merck, which operates as MilliporeSigma in the United States and Canada. Currently, Udit is a board member of the Massachusetts Biotechnology Council, the Massachusetts High Tech Council, which he is the immediate past chairman, and the Analytical Life Science and Diagnostics Association. He also serves on the Alumni Council for the Department of Chemical and Biological Engineering at Princeton. Udit, welcome to the GradFUTURES Forum.
Good morning, Eva, and thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much. We're looking forward to having a wide-ranging conversation this morning, but I thought perhaps we could start off with a little bit of reflection on your own graduate student experience. When you think back, what are some of the core skills and competencies that you learned during your time as a graduate student that have continued to inform your career and to propel you forward throughout your career?
So, Eva, thank you for the question. Look, I was pretty young when I came to Princeton, and I was still maturing, learning how to be a graduate student, and had wonderful teachers, mentors, and friends. And you learn a lot in graduate school. You learn different subjects. You learn them much more deeply. But I would want to focus my comments on really two topics. I had already spent my undergraduate degree trying to get over the fear of failure, really looking beyond just being competitively successful, and already started to think through what really was driving me and what I wanted to do. And Princeton really took that journey deeper. I think if you just look at Princeton's graduate curriculum and you look at the ethos of the university, it propels you to deeply and relentlessly understand and develop insights. So truly understanding fundamental issues and in engineering fundamental phenomena, and to the point where you have a deep insight into what the phenomena is, and at the same time, paradoxically, also making sure you're humble because your insight might be based on some assumptions that can be proven wrong. And so those are the two things that I would say were uniquely relevant in my Princeton experience. And I can share an example with you. So I worked with one of the leading researchers in the field, my former advisor, Bill Russell, who was also the Dean of Graduate Studies. I think you know Bill pretty well. And Bill was a remarkable researcher, very exacting. My thesis was mostly experimental with a little bit of theoretical work. And after having finished all the experimental work towards the end, Bill said, look, Udit, all this is well and good, but we have a tradition of working on fundamentally new theories. So I would like you to pick one problem in the literature and work on it and do it analytically. Do it analytically, meaning you could not use computational techniques, right? So the problem was very simple. I'll take you down sort of my scientific path a little bit to explain what we were trying to do. We were simply trying to explain a phenomena we observed in what are called microemulsions. These are suspensions of squishy particles. And we basically saw that as you increase the concentration of particles in the suspension, the viscosity of the suspension rose very nicely, as if these were hard spheres bumping into each other or sticky spheres bumping into each other. And then there was a strange phenomenon that occurred at a certain concentration, and the viscosity started to go down. This was in contrast to any theory that we knew of, and we were struggling to understand the experimental results. And it was a problem that had existed in the literature for close to five decades. So Bill said, let's look at this. So we've done the experiments, but we haven't explained it well enough. So why don't you think about it at a fundamental level? So I said, okay, fine. Let's try to model these as hard spheres and see what happens. And we could easily see that the viscosity was nicely modeled very early on with hard spheres that were a little bit sticky to each other. But then the theory diverged from experiments. And of course, observation is always correct, and the theory is wrong if the observations don't agree with the theory. So long story short, we came up, or I would say more arrogantly, I came up with an idea after studying the literature for a good 2 to 3 months, borrowed an idea from an Israeli scientist and started to model these particles as soft particles that somehow coalesced. So think of soapy particles. Hard particles cannot coalesce. I said, well, if they coalesce, what would happen? And I started to model them as coalescing particles. And I could start to explain the phenomena because I basically derived the physics and I put it all into a computational model, and voila, you could explain you could explain you could explain the phenomena. And I went to Bill and I said, hey, we got it. Bill said, no, not so fast. Remember what I said? I said, you have to do this fundamentally and you have to do it analytically, meaning on a piece of paper with, at that time we used to write on a piece of paper rather than type. So I was stuck, and this is the only thing that stood between me and my PhD thesis. So I spent a good 2 to 3 months just searching for good mathematical techniques to derive and explain this phenomena analytically. And I mean, almost having given up, I was sitting in the Lapidus lounge in the chemical engineering department, scouring away a chicken parm from Hoagie Haven when an assistant professor, Sandra Troyan, walked in, and Sandra said, look, what's the glum face about? You're about to finish. You should be happy. I said, I don't think I'll ever finish. I don't think I will ever understand how to do this analytically. I've tried all sorts of mathematical things. And she, at that point, said, well, you have an insight. When I explained to her what we had done, she said, that's really cool. But she, at that point, said, why don't you try inverting something? And this was just a mathematical technique. I said, yeah, well, I've tried everything. Okay, fine. So after eating lunch later in the afternoon, I tried it, and voila, it worked. The analytical method she suggested worked. So the moral of the story being now, just to take a full step back, Bill pushed me to the end of my intellectual limit to try and derive something analytically. That is the yearning for truly, 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 truly understanding something. And I have him to thank for that. But I was stuck. And had I not had the humility to listen to this other person who was coming from a completely different angle, I would have never succeeded. And those are the two things I take from my graduate experience the most. Really, the yearning to truly understand something, and the humility to know that even if after trying your best, there are always people who have better ideas. So I would say those are the two things.
And the surprising, sort of being open to the surprising influences, we were looking for answers in all these different places, but being open to receiving,
Yes.
advice from someone who perhaps wasn't the expert in the field, etc. Plus, of course, we can never discount the magical power of a chicken parm hoagie from Hoagie.
No, I don't think I could consume one of those things, even a quarter of those now. I used to be able to eat one without any problem, but now they're huge. They're not foot long. They're probably 3 feet long. Look at them now.
Yes, yes. And so for our viewing audience who may not be familiar, this is a Princeton, just a classic spot where most folks find comfort food. Well, that's, again, I think you touched on the importance of mentorship, several times, of course, with former Dean Russell, who we do all know very well and admire so greatly. With mentorship in particular, one of the things that we do when we advise students is really to think about broadly mentorship, your faculty advisor being, a primary mentor in your graduate career. Who are some of the other mentors that you've had throughout your career? What has been the influence of having multiple mentors? Clearly, former Dean Russell is a lifelong mentor.
Indeed. I mean, Bill has a special place. Look, the way I think of mentorship, and this is probably not classical, I think of mentorship in three different areas or three different types of mentors. The first are people who really influence your philosophy, how you think about life. And I would put the women in my life in this category, my mom and my wife, and I'll explain that in a minute. Those are my sort of philosophical mentors. The second category are your bosses and people who are truly your superiors, and they often teach you things. And I'll give you an example of somebody beyond Bill, who I met down the line, one of my bosses at Novartis. And then the third, which is probably the richest place for advice, are accidental mentors, people who are not trying to give you advice, people who you're not seeking advice from, but you just observe and you say, wow, I think I want to learn how to do that. So let me give you examples from all three of these categories. So it's my mom. I would say I have her to thank for always asking me to think about what is right and giving me sort of the moral backbone to always ask myself, if I look back at something that I did, how would I feel 10 years from now? And we always do that. I always do that experiment, and I always did it with her before before marriage, and now I call her every day. And sometimes the discussions are not long enough for us to get into the details. But very early on, that was something that she sort of embedded in us. Um, and my wife, she's my co-CEO. I mean, these jobs are not easy. For me, I'm thankful that it's not lonely because she's with me, and I can often analytically figure out what are the right sort of directions, or possibly the right directions. But I don't have always the skill to articulate how to express them in the way they are supposed to be received and intended to be received. And she helps me a ton with that. And I could give you thousands of examples of where she's been the better part of the co-CEO equation. The second category is really bosses. And let me give you an example. I mean, one of the best bosses I ever had was a guy at Novartis, the CFO at Novartis. And he gave me problems that I felt I couldn't solve myself. He always saw more in me than I could ever feel that I had in me. And those are really helpful folks who really try to stretch your thinking. And he had a saying, he said, I will not tell you what I think before you tell me what you think. I will not tell you what I think before you tell me what you think. And it was terrific because he would give us, I mean, at some point he asked me to come up with the capital structure for a company like Novartis. Should we do share buybacks? Should we buy companies? Should we issue dividends? And I had very little finance background to be able to do something like this. But he said, you can do it. You have all the fundamentals. And he gave me 2 weeks to do it. So talk about a challenge. And at the end, it worked out fine. So mentors who really push you beyond what you think your own limit is. And I was fortunate enough to have met many such people, but the CFO at Novartis, Raymond Roy, has a unique position apart from Bill Russell. And then the third are accidental mentors, people who you just observe, or books you read. And one of my favorite books is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And One of the quotes that always stays with me is if you believe in your legend, the whole universe conspires to help you achieve it. If you really believe in your legend, the whole universe conspires to help you achieve it. My interpretation of this is, if you believe in, if you have a goal that is in service of the universe, the whole universe conspires to help you achieve it. And I found that to be so consistent and so easy to understand, so consistent with the philosophy I have. And so that is an accidental mentor. I've never met Paulo Coelho, but he's an accidental mentor for me. So I could give you many examples, but those are the three categories I seek, I think of, and one is my family, especially the two women in my life, and the second is my different bosses, especially the ones who push me to think further, and the third are accidental mentors, people who you meet, and there are many, many, many of them, or books you read. So I hope that's helpful.
That certainly is very helpful. I love that quote, and I think we'll definitely try to incorporate that as we're in discussion with graduate students, because it is believing in yourself and knowing that there are others that believe in you as well, and being open to the journey too. I love the universe conspires with you. That's very, very powerful. Thinking about business skills in particular, you mentioned a bit about the challenge of not having a finance background. Often, one of the professional development skill areas that we'll talk about with graduate students is this sort of concept of business skills, and thinking, through whether that's in academia, that you are running a lab, you're perhaps running that as a business. In some ways, you're leaning into business skills. Can you speak about, as you transitioned into industry, what were some of the other business skills? What did you find that you needed to add to your portfolio of skills and competencies, and how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, let's again talk about it in two different dimensions, right? So one is the structure of learning and implementing. That remains the same, right? I mean, at least I abstracted in three different parts. One, you spend time listening and learning, studying the facts, getting people's opinions. For me in my job, I talk to customers, I talk to shareholders, I talk to investors, I talk to our employees, and I talk to researchers around the globe, and I read a lot, right? So listening and learning and factually understanding what is it that is the basis of what you have to do. Second is what we talked about earlier, really relentlessly asking yourself what matters, really deeply examining the facts and the situation and saying what is it that matters, and how are you going to help that, use that to help you determine the future direction. And the third is exactly what you do in graduate school, which is, once you decide what you have to do, what is the insight that you're after, you implement, you do experiments relentlessly, you focus on execution, you're disciplined. So the fundamentals are the same in business as they are in graduate school, or they are in any other job. I think the second aspect of this is what sort of skills you can use and that help you augment what, if you have a scientific background. For instance, in my case, I had a PhD in chemical engineering, and what triggers that, and you have to invest in your learning, right? So I feel, if you want to go further in your career, you need to invest in three different elements. One, your competence to really make sure that you're courageous and you're taking risks. And third, you invest in compassion. And we can talk about each of these, but let's focus on the competence aspect. I think that's the nature of your question. For me, after spending 5 years at Merck, in R&D, I had, and I'll give you sort of the moment when I felt I wanted to go to the business side and what I did after that. I was working on a leading program, a leading drug for Merck, back in late 1997. And we had designed some really clever ways of delivering the drug. And I'm not the only one. There were a whole bunch of folks who were working on this problem, and we designed very clever ways of delivering the delivering the drug, so that it could be efficacious. It was a drug that would compete with the leading antidepressant in the market called Prozac. It was way better in its efficacy in the early clinical studies, and it had very few side effects. The early clinical studies looked very promising, so we were all working on it. And I remember the day. In fact, we were invited to a meeting in a different building. A whole bunch of us working on the program. I think about 30 or 40 of us showed up in a big conference room. Head of research was there, the head of marketing, and there was a lady who basically, after we had all presented the scientific aspects, who got up and in 15 minutes showed us why the drug would not succeed in the marketplace. And it was an incredible presentation. She took all our scientific ideas and converted that into a simple strategic frame that said, look, with this level of differentiation, this particular drug will not reach anything close to the peak sales that we had imagined. And it was an insightful, telling presentation, and then the drug was benched or was shelved after that presentation. I said, you know what, I've got to understand how to do this stuff. Before that, I always thought, these business people, yeah, they talk high level stuff, and all they can talk about is colors and shapes and sizes. I mean, how does that matter to anyone? And it was terribly naive. It was a terribly limited view of what the business world really does. But I mean, that particular presentation had such an impact that I started to take courses in the evening. I used to drive from the West Point, Pennsylvania site of Merck to Wharton, to the business school in UPenn. In the evenings, I would basically take accounting and finance classes. And I said, this is not so bad. I started to understand a little bit about business. So it was an investment in my own learning and taking evening classes. And one thing led to another. I applied to a strategy consulting firm called McKinsey. Spent a few, after basically got in and spent a few years there learning about the business world. And again, that was in some ways a risk, because I was reasonably successful as a researcher. And I had to then start at the bottom of the totem pole again at McKinsey and work my way up. But it was a superb investment. And I'm so glad I did it. But I think once you develop an interest, and so if you want to, let's say there are others who might want to do this, and if you want to go into the business side of things, invest some time learning fundamentals, have respect for what is it that these folks do. Never forget your scientific skills, but I think an investment in learning is absolutely critical. Apart from following the same protocol that I talked about earlier, just listen and learn. Make sure you're fact-based. Make sure you're trying to understand why is it the way the things are the way they are, and then finally execute with excellence. But an investment in learning is required if you want to switch fields, and a bit of humility really helps.
Absolutely. Again, when I think about what you're describing, what comes to mind for me is growth mindset, and having that growth mindset, the lifelong learning investment. I love this 3 C's: competence, courage, and compassion. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on compassion? I would say, as a leader, for sure, during times of crisis, during these times of the pandemic, I'm sure compassion has played a significant role in how you lead your organization. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so Eva, it's probably the most important characteristic one needs to have, especially if you are leading a global company, right? I have the privilege of being born in India, having lived in the UK, having gone to school also in Nigeria, worked in Japan, Switzerland, Germany, Australia, and a lot in the US. I'm a global citizen, and I grew up in a joint family, meaning 3 generations under the same roof. My father and his brothers lived in the same family, so you have no choice but to have compassion, because you are not first. You're always in service of the whole family, and you have to make adjustments. But in leadership, probably the most important characteristic. And let me give you an example. Back in August of last year, of 2021, we implemented our vaccine policy. This is well before any vaccine mandate was implemented by anyone, and we basically felt we had enough scientific data and enough understanding of vaccines that we wanted all our employees, especially in a healthcare company, to be vaccinated. So we basically said from one day to the next, hey, there's enough data. We are going to ask everyone in our company to be vaccinated and with 2 doses of either mRNA vaccine or any other vaccine. And I think the next 48 hours were probably the most challenging in my leadership career. I've been leading global businesses for over a decade, but the next 48 hours were to be the most difficult ones. And I'll tell you why. Within minutes, I got very nice messages once we issued the memo and said, look, you have to get vaccinated. This is how much time you have to do it. And we said by, and the memo came out in August, and we said by November 15th or so, please try to get vaccinated. And if you don't, we'll have to have a discussion about how we work together in the future. And of course, if you need an exception, let's have a discussion about what the basis of the exception is. Within minutes, I got some really positive messages from colleagues who said, great job, we really need this, it's courageous. And I said, why are they saying it's courageous? I mean, it's common sense. It's a scientific organization. We're a life science company. We supply materials to make vaccines. We should be the first ones getting vaccinated. What's the problem? And within 45 minutes, I found out why. I got some of the most, I would say, direct and strong so the one of the most, I guess, the strongest opposition that I've ever seen to any initiative in a set of emails, one after the other. And my email box just got full very, very quickly with how many people objected to the policy, and for many, many, many different reasons. So it had taken me some time to align my leadership team to issue the mandate. And we had some data. We had data that said 90% of our people, and this was only relevant to the US, 90% of our people had already been vaccinated. So I said, 10%, you can get over that. And I'm fact-based. And I said, 10% we can deal with. We learned very quickly the true number was 70%. And so much for surveys, so much for self-reporting. The true number was about 70% people vaccinated. So 30% of our people in the United States, we have about 2,700 folks in the US. In the US were not vaccinated, and most of them happened to be in some of the most important functions during the pandemic in manufacturing and distribution. And at the same time, our business has started to do very well. The demand was going through the roof, so we really needed manufacturing to be focused, supply chain to be focused. And suddenly we realized 50% of the folks in manufacturing and supply chain had not been vaccinated. And many of them told us that they had no intention to get vaccinated. So things started to get really, really complicated and complicated fast. I, at that point, asked my head of HR, a terrific colleague, and said, look, let's get the manufacturing folks and this shift and the supply chain folks in this shift at the headquarters together. I want to speak to them. She said, are you crazy? This is very difficult. People are very charged up. This is physically, it will not be a good idea. We should have security, this and that. I think they arranged security. I'm not sure what they did. But I basically went to a ball field. We have a softball field near our headquarters, part of our company. We took a box. I stood on a box with a mic, and about roughly 500 folks came and wanted to discuss this particular memo, which had been issued 6 to 7 hours earlier. I'd say we had 2.5 hours of conversation, and they ranged from, I would say, some supportive, but mostly combative and direct, right? And we took questions, and I explained why we were trying to do what we were trying to do. It was not just for individual safety, it was for public safety and making sure everybody was safe. At that point, we had 70% people vaccinated. And so it basically we had several such sessions. I had one that day and one other next day, and I'll give you an example of what kind of questions were coming up and how we had to deal with them. There was one colleague who walked up to me and they said, look, Udit, I've been working in the company for 41 years. I love the company. I'm going to retire in 6 months. My wife and I've had COVID, and I don't want to take the vaccine. What should I do? I put my hand around his shoulders. This was after the discussion. I said, look, if you allow us to just explain to you why we are asking you to get vaccinated, I will have no problem if you still decide to leave, and we will take care of your retirement. We will give you a full retirement. You can leave sooner if you like. A month later, his wife and he both got vaccinated. We had our internal scientific team that was looking at the data, forming our own point of view, and not letting people just pick from various sources. And he was just one of many. Today, we have 96% of our population vaccinated. It took us a good 2.5, 3 months to go person by person and have a scientific discussion on the basis of the basis of policy and explaining it to person by person. And I can tell you, I have deep respect for my human resource colleagues. These were not easy discussions, and I mean they were very combative to the point where one of the colleagues told me that I didn't understand because I was not American, and I asked him, and there were very few I responded to. There were many such things, and I asked him how old he was. He said he was 34 years old, and I said I've been longer in the U.S. than your whole life, so you can determine who's more American. But that said, there were many such discussions, and it took a lot of patience and a lot of understanding. And I think I'm so glad I'm surrounded by colleagues who had the patience to take the whole organization together and take it forward. But leading in these times really forces us to understand another person's point of view, listen, and then together determine what the right answer is. I think it's very easy to judge at a distance. It's much more difficult to collaboratively work and move forward. And I have deep respect for my colleagues who basically helped us talk person by person, and we went from about 70% vaccination rate to 96%.
Wow. Well, I do believe that the culture is set at the top because you demonstrated that empathy and the willingness to listen. Others were modeling that as well throughout the organization. Yeah, this is certainly those, I'm sure, were not comfortable conversations. So, having the courage, as you mentioned, going back to courage, having the courage to say, no, I'm going to that ball field and I'm standing on that box and having this conversation. That is really facing challenge and taking into account the human factor here.
It's critical, Eva. I mean, you're not. We sometimes underestimate especially in scientific organizations. We assume everybody understands the facts, and I've grown up like that too. Facts are the facts are the facts, but taking the time to explain the facts and meeting people, I would say even halfway, understanding their point of view. And every individual has a different circumstance. It's very easy to generalize. It's much more difficult to work specifically with every colleague. And we're better off. I learned a lot. I mean, there's not enough time to share all the learnings. I learned so much about the culture, the colleagues. I mean, I'm so thankful that I had the opportunity to talk to so many folks. But it was, I would say, the toughest 48 hours in my leadership career, because we could have brought the company to a halt.
Yeah, and I when I think about strategic communications as a leader, showing empathy certainly was something that was coming through in all of your communication, whether it was in person in that ball field and the way that you structured messages that were going out. Can we talk a little bit about, just even more broadly, strategic communications, communicating a vision, and how really you mobilize an entire organization around your vision? Speak a little bit about the role of communications in that.
It's paramount, especially if you're leading a large global organization. I don't get to see my colleagues, not all of them. Sometimes I will go through a whole career like I did with Millipore Sigma. We had 23,000 people. I don't think I met many of them, probably majority of them. But the task of the leader, first and foremost, is to take very complex situations and simplify to the essence what matters for the company, right? And I think in threes. And for Waters, really, we three things matter right now. Our vision is surround is our the vision of the company, and I don't say it's my vision, it's our vision, that it's our vision together, or I have had the chance to learn from my colleagues and really understand what is it that motivates us. Only three things motivate us. I mean, we want to solve, we're a scientific organization. We're mostly engineers and scientists of different types, or people if even who are of different backgrounds have learned science on the way. We get motivated by solving big problems. We want to help get medicines faster to the market by ensuring that biologics processing is much simpler and much faster than it has been in its history. It's a very difficult problem. It requires a lot of collaboration. It requires a lot of deep understanding, but that's what motivates us. That's exciting for us. We want to work with people, and we want to create a community of people who like being with each other, who respect each other, who trust each other. Who wants to be with people who you don't like, respect, or trust, right? So that's our second pillar. And the third pillar is the deletion experiment. We want every one of us to feel like we're making a contribution. So if I did not exist, would the word be any different? We call it the deletion or the insertion experiment, being constructive or not so constructive. You can pick whichever one, but those are the three elements. And you have to simplify, and then you have to simplify what you mean so that everybody can understand. And then each individual can figure out in each of those buckets, okay, so we're trying to solve this big problem in biologics manufacturing. What role do I play? So I'm not giving people individual instructions. As CEO, I'm not saying, hey, you know what, you do this, you do this, you do this, and you do this. No, no, not at all. If I'm doing that, then what are people doing? And that's not even respecting people's own ability to figure out how they're going to contribute. But we together define the problems we want to solve, right, based on our capabilities. And we say, look, as Waters, we think we can make a huge difference in developing better analytical techniques to interrogate complex molecules, be it mRNA molecules, be it cells, be it proteins, be it small molecules. We can develop the best techniques to interrogate molecules. That's one of the problems we want to solve. And the engineers will design better equipment. The software team will design better software. The chemistry team will design better separation approaches, better columns to separate. So everyone has to, and I'm not giving instructions to each and every one, say, you do this, you do this. Everyone looks at the problem and says, yeah, this is cool. I think I want to be part of this. And we ask people to do the mom experiment. When you go home, will your mother be proud of what you're working on? And I think that's basically it. It's not more difficult, but there is complexity hidden in the simplicity of communication, right? So everyone can pick from that what are they going to do. And there are other problems as well. So for instance, for our materials business, we want to develop the best analytical techniques to characterize batteries for electric vehicles. Batteries today have challenges in how they're manufactured, especially lithium-ion batteries. I mean, these are really people. You have to take slurries and use slurries to fill cavities, and once you fill the cavity, if it's not homogeneous, you can have localized heating, which can lead to explosion of batteries or other problems. And we have analytical techniques in our TA business to address that problem better than anybody else. But we pose the problem at the top, articulate it, clearly articulate it, and then the teams figure out, okay, I think I'll do this and I'll do that and I'll do that. And that's about it. But the role of communication is absolutely critical. And I would even argue it is the task of a leader to take sophisticated, complex things and simplify them without losing the sophistication. Simplicity can be stupid, and simplicity can be sophisticated. I think we know which one we want it to be.
Yeah, and I think thank you for that, because also, it speaks to having an awareness of your audience, what is most meaningful and relevant to your audience, whoever that audience is. And the broader the audience is, the more simple, I think, and concise
Yeah.
the messaging.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think if you can't explain something to a naive listener, you probably don't understand it well enough, right? I did my PhD thesis in an area of in an offshoot of fluid mechanics, and I took fluid mechanics 4 times in different setups. before I fully understood it. And the fourth time, I was a teaching assistant for Professor Roy Jackson in chemical engineering. And he unfortunately fell ill during that time, and I had to teach part of his class, which is not usually what Princeton allows. TAs don't teach courses, but for 50% of the time, I had to teach it. And I got a teaching award at the end as a consequence. But that is the time I truly understood statics and fluid mechanics. The first time I took it as an undergrad, I think I was fine, but I probably got a decent grade, but I didn't understand anything. The second time I took it was as a senior, as an undergrad. It was an advanced course in fluid mechanics. I got a decent grade then as well, but I don't think I understood it. The third time I took it with Professor Dudley Saville, who was supposed to be one of the toughest teachers in chemical engineering. I loved it. He taught it so well. I learned, I think, 60% of what he was trying to teach. And then when I was a TA for Roy Jackson, that's when I understood fluid mechanics as well as I could. So
Yeah, and the role of teaching in communications, right? The linkage there. That's essentially, when we boil it down, that is what you're trying to do.
absolutely correct. You got it. That's it. I mean, you are simplifying and you're trying to teach um, your audience in very simple terms what you mean.
Yeah. You mentioned something else earlier about really the nature of having a collaborative team and really rallying around a shared vision in that. Can you speak a little bit to inclusivity in terms of inclusive innovation, how building diverse teams, plays a role in really elevating the nature of innovation and bringing in diverse perspectives?
I think it's critical and it's essential. You cannot have maybe people are maybe people can think differently, but I have not found an example in my career where one has had an insight without having somehow orthogonal views converge at the problem, right? I mean, I gave you an example from my PhD time frame where I was an expert in a certain area and I'd spent so much time trying to understand it, and I was stuck until Sandra Troyan came in and said, hey, why don't you do this? And she had no idea what I was really working on, but she was super smart, super competent, and could understand it well enough to suggest something which really was the true insight to solve the problem, right? So having diverse perspectives is absolutely critical, right? Diverse perspectives from have two benefits, right? And I'll define diversity and where the source of it in a minute. One is on the problem solving, and the other is in creating the compassion that is needed to implement a solution, right? So when you're working in a global setup or you're working in diverse teams, it's really critical when you're developing a solution or product that you understand that your customers have diverse perspectives, different views, and bringing them early on into the problem solving helps you design the right product. It's really critical. It's in fact essential, right? Now, we can define diversity in many different ways, right? And I think we are woefully behind as a country in the US in having diverse perspectives and diverse backgrounds in every level of management. And I think Waters has done reasonably well over the last few years in creating a bit more gender parity. We still have work to do. We're not where we should be. But we are woefully behind in having enough representation of African American and folks of Latin descent. Right? We just don't have. We haven't had it for in our history, and it has, I would say, been somehow a priority, but the actions have not really paid dividend. And we are deeply committed to making a difference, right? To the point where I was talking to my leadership team, and once a year we have a leadership meeting, which has not happened, I would say, physically for many years now, especially the last 2 years. But the one that we're planning in June, where we will bring our top 100 leaders, basically I was talking to the team and I said, show me the slate. And they showed the slate. Of course, it's still, I would say, 60-40 male female, so gender is still a little bit off. very few representatives of Asian descent, very few representatives, I would say almost none, of African American descent, and very few of Latino descent. And I said, we will do a top down correction. They said, what do you mean? I said, look, we will become a representation of the society we live in. So show me the fraction of people there are in scientific disciplines and show me a pie chart. And we will basically mimic the pie chart. And they said, well, Udit, how will you do it? Because it's a top 100 people. They don't exist. I said, no, we'll go dig deeper into the organization. We will not stop until we have enough people that represent the pie of the society that we live in, scientific disciplines and the ones that we look at. Um, and we will make a top-down correction on who's attending, even if people are very junior, even if it's day one of their job, and if it means that we have to invite people who are yet not in the company and we expect them to be in the company, we will do it, because you have to make a top-down correction. I mean, it will not work otherwise. And so I think I just wanted to state that, and I think you touched a nerve when you asked the question. I mean, for me, it's critical. I'm a beneficiary of it as well, myself, right? So I know how difficult it can be for people to get through certain difficulties, and I've had the privilege of having so many people help me and believe in me. And you know what? It requires a bit of discrete action as opposed to gradual movements. Yes, there will be a systemic correction over time, but let's maybe take a couple of bold actions and see how it is.
Yeah, yeah. And this is leading me to thinking about systemic actions as related to building a talent pipeline, because that is critical. That
Yep.
is absolutely critical. And investing in the talent you have is one area for sure, and certainly looking at promotional opportunities and all of that within the company. Can you speak a little bit to the role of internships? So you see the segue I'm going for here. The role of internships in developing a talent pipeline, and in particular, a diverse talent pipeline.
Again, you do a top-down correction, right? So, and that's the best opportunity you have. So we're a global company, and if you're going to be a representation of the society that we live in, we have to do sort of an overcorrection when we bring in interns. So we've looked at that, and our human resource team has a plan that is global, where we are overcorrecting on certain backgrounds, but remaining true to our scientific roots. But internships are absolutely critical, Eva, right? And I think you know this from work we've done together in the past. I'm a product of having an internship at DuPont very early on. Having a chance as a student to go into a company like ours or another company gives you a practical understanding of how many disciplines are required to achieve and develop products or develop services. You simply have no idea if you're just working in a lab. And this is something that came up in one of the advisory council meetings at Princeton in the chemical engineering department, where I think it was Rick Register, who was the chairman at the time, mentioned, or the director of graduate studies. He said, "Look, we have Princeton attracts really intelligent students, but many of them have no practical experience, even if they're engineers. And engineers usually did internships in the past at companies. You went to a plant and then you learned A, B, and C." And he said, "Oh, you know how we have to correct it." I said, "How many students do you have that are incoming?" He said, "About 14 to 15." I said, we'll take all of them." He said, "Oh, really? You would?" I said, "Yeah. I mean, if they're global, fine. I mean, we'll give them 3 months of internship at our company, and it's a win-win because you get incredibly intelligent kids if they're coming to Princeton. They worked really hard to come into graduate school, so I mean, nothing's better for our company to attract those folks, and then they learn practical aspects of their work before going into the lab and doing some research. So it's a win-win. And I'm a big believer in internships. I mean, they basically create a connection with talent, and it also helps us as a company stay a bit more current than having purely experienced folks. And for the interns, it's a great experience to just learn practical aspects of a business.
Absolutely, and for our audience, in case you don't know this, Udit was a champion and is a champion for our graduate students in developing pre-matriculation internships. So the summer before they begin their doctoral program at Princeton, this was launched during your time at Millipore Sigma, and we're delighted to now also launch this month these similar opportunities for incoming graduate students for the chemical and biological engineering at Waters. So we will be bringing more information soon to those incoming graduate students on how to apply. But this is something that we're not seeing, at least to our knowledge, we're not seeing these sorts of experiences for graduate students anywhere else. So we're so grateful to you for these.
Happy to do it. And and there's a question I think in the chat
Yes.
about do you hire humanities and social science PhDs? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Our head of human resources has a PhD in psychology. I wish we had gotten her as an intern as well. Maybe we would have turned her into an engineer. That was a mistake. No, she's terrific, and I mean, absolutely, we do.
Yeah.
We have internships in many different departments, and they include the legal department, they include human resources, they include procurement. So it is not. They include finance. It's not purely scientific disciplines.
Yeah. And clearly a fan of Hoagie Haven as well.
Yes.
Wonderful. I know we have two more questions, so let's make sure that we can tee those up as well. I think we have one more coming in from the chat. Here we go. From Peter, what advice do you have for natural sciences PhDs interested going into industry but fearful of lack of business and training exposure?
No, I would look. I didn't have it either when I went in. So go into the research domain. No issues at all. I mean, you will go into a lab, and then if you have an interest in going towards the business side, invest in your learning. Take courses. Don't underestimate what it takes to do business. Right? Meaning what there are specific disciplines, I mean, microeconomics, macroeconomics, and I think they're very relevant in these times as we see geopolitical challenges. Invest in understanding accounting, in finance, in valuation. So understand and have respect for those disciplines, and it's not an insurmountable transition. Many people make it, but I think those who are successful really respect the difficulty of those disciplines as well. And it's difficult to get an engineering PhD or a physics or a math or a biology PhD. It's equally difficult to get an advanced degree in different business disciplines.
Mhm.
So have respect and learn, and I think you can make the transition.
Yeah. And I'll just mention for the Princeton graduate students that are listening as well, tomorrow we're launching a business skills in academia and beyond learning cohort. So you can learn more about these essential business skills and pursue that in your time here in your graduate program, just at least early exposure.
And Eva, one more thing. I mean, for instance, many companies have continuous learning programs, right? Either through the web or in person. So, for instance, we at Waters have a program with Duke University where we partnered with them to have our scientific teams learn accounting, finance, strategic marketing, and then we will transition into leadership training. But there are many companies who do this. I mean, we're doing it in partnership with Duke. I mean, you could also do it in partnership with others, but most companies have those programs. So if you join a company, you will find ample opportunities provided you make the time to learn.
Definitely. I think we may have time for one more question. Okay.
Sure.
The barrier between leadership, corporate, and the operators on the manufacturing floor.
I think the example I gave you about the vaccine mandate was exactly that, and I think you've touched the insight in that discussion.
Mhm.
It is again very easy to assume that there are barriers in communication if you've never really tried to communicate, and it's very easy to create segments It's much more difficult to have a conversation as human beings. And once you have it, it's easier. But you just have to understand there's another person on the other side. Yeah, so what? They have a different view. And just listen. I mean, just sit there and listen. Don't react. Truly try and listen to what the other point of view is. And I have personally experienced it. And I have now a much better understanding of what my colleagues in different functions go through. And nobody's wrong. No one is wrong. Everyone has just different backgrounds, different understanding, and you just have to come to a common understanding by discussing things, looking at facts. And you can also agree to disagree. There's no problem, right? If you fundamentally look at the same set of facts and come to different conclusions, that's rarely the case, but you can come to different conclusions. That does not mean that you don't respect the other person's point of view. And we've, as I said, I mean, we went from 70% to 96% vaccination rate. We had 50% in manufacturing and supply chain, but it basically, with respectful dialogue with each individual, people vaccinated, and many of them have gotten boosters after that, right? Good science, good explanation, a clear heart, I think takes you very far. So I'm a big believer in just having compassion for each other's point of view.
Yeah, and listening to understand.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We do have one final question. I think we might be able to just close out on this one. Your relationship to your PhD, to what degree do you identify as an academic?
You never lose it. You never ever lose it. I feel the only thing that I ever really learned properly to its depth was what I studied in my PhD. You never really have. I mean, really, honestly, the best advice I can give you is make sure you get the juice out of your time in graduate school or undergraduate, and just enjoy it, but also learn, because this is the only time that you'll have nothing else to do without distractions. And just take advantage of it, because I feel to this day, what I understand the best is how two soft particles come together. I don't understand anything better than that. Uh, so I think you never lose touch with it, and don't lose touch with it. I mean, I love it. Um, I feel like I was born to do this job. I was trained to do this job. I mean, where else would I want to be? Now I studied engineering, and I was using a lot of the products that we currently manufacture, and now I get to manufacture them. Um, and as a user, I have a lot of empathy for what the users go through. I get to manufacture them with great colleagues, and we get to turn our attention to solving terrific problems that will make a difference to many people. I mean, where else would you want to be? And it has all its roots in being a scientific nerd. I still love it. I mean, I still get it, and my team's irritated because I definitely don't have enough knowledge to be useful in the scientific areas, but I try to be, right, because I did my PhD in an area called rheology, and we use instruments that our company manufactures now, and many of them haven't changed. So I sometimes try to get into, well, how this is and how that is, and the team says, that's they entertained me for a little while. I mean, as CEO, you have a privilege of people having to listen to you, even if you're saying nonsense, for a few minutes. But now I think the teams know me well enough. They cut me off in 30 seconds and say, "This is just nonsensical. Why don't we talk about the real facts?" But you never lose it. You never ever lose it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. I know that the graduate students and our graduate alums and broader audience really appreciated your candid conversation today, the insights that you've shared. I'm going to take us back to where we started at the beginning and close us out with that wonderful quote about believing in your legend and the universe conspiring to help you achieve it. Udit, may the universe continue to conspire with you, and as well with our graduate students and the broader graduate community. I think you have really provided a lot of inspiration, and certainly the ways that we can maintain our identity as scholars and academics, and infuse that into the work that we can do in a broad array of Industries. Thank you so much, and we'll look forward as well. Spoiler alert, the graduate school will be honoring Udit Batra on Friday as well with a Clio Hall Award for his dedication and his work in advancing graduate student professional development at Princeton. So spoiler alert, we'll congratulate you and look forward to seeing you at the ceremony as well. Thank you for all that you do. And we look forward to continuing to have more conversations with you at other events as well.
Eva, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.